Okay, we've started. Ladies and gentlemen, John Lawrence Stevens, RAC. You know him as Larry. Is your dad John or something?
Yes, very good. Yes, he was.
Tends to be the thing.
Yeah.
My father didn't have a middle name. None. And I wasn't Joe Jr., I was just Joey to his Joe or Joey, and that's the way we handled that.
When your mother says your name like Joe, you know you're in trouble. When you're Joey, you're okay.
Well, God rest his soul. Now it's just, I don't have any competition. Anyhow, enough about me for now. So, we're here to talk about the mindset of the FDA employee. And you are an 11-year veteran of said organization.
Well, actually 21 years total. I'll explain my background.
The people are waiting.
Okay. Well, you want to get my screen up there?
Oh, okay, you have, that's good. Let's do that. I didn't know that we were going to be treated to slides as well.
All right.
Let's
there we
get
go.
started. Okay.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank all of you who've taken the time out of your busy day or your early morning or your late evening, wherever you're at. This is a webinar that I've done before, and I find it is unusual. I don't know that anybody else is doing it or could do it, but I'm pleased to be a part of this forum because the medical device group has been a great find for me, and I encourage you to look into that. Okay. Just to prove that I really was an FDA guy, this is a picture that was taken when I was the director of the import operations in Los Angeles. That was from 03 to 08, and that crest there obviously is Health and Human Services, and you say, well, what am I doing? Well, actually, I'm not doing anything. The secretary of HHS was going to be visiting that day and was going to have a press conference down at the harbor, and we went out and set it up, and I said to one of my guys, hey, let me stand back behind and take my picture. But that's the main channel of the Port of Los Angeles, and you can see there's a bridge. You can probably tell it's a bridge up to the top of the picture. That's the Vincent Thomas Bridge, which connects the Los Angeles, well, San Pedro with Long Beach. And so it was a nice place to work, and it was probably one of the best jobs I ever had in my life.
Looks Photoshopped to me.
No. That was really me.
I couldn't even really make out that it was you. It could have been any old white guy. Go on.
Okay, all right.
We're having fun, folks. Go on.
I have what I consider a rather unusual career, only because it certainly wasn't planned. But I went to work for FDA in 1972, right out of college, as an FDA investigator. Then I became a public health educator. And then the final job was a small business representative, and that was a medical device specialty job. In '76, when the device law was passed, they formed these small business representatives. And I was selected for the one in Los Angeles and was trained on the new medical device law. So Larry, being somewhat intuitive, said, gee, now I know all about medical device law, maybe I could go into the industry and be successful in industry. My brother was very encouraging to me at the time. He says, are you crazy? You don't know what a real job is, Larry. You've never had a real job. You're going to fail miserably. That's the encouragement of my brother. Anyway, I went in 1982, became a regulatory affairs manager, and spent the next 18 years mostly in the cardiovascular device industry. Worked my way up the line to taking over clinical studies and director. And finally, the last few years of my career, I was a VP of REQ and clinical for a couple of really large cardiovascular companies and 2 or 3 startups. So I got that experience. But then an interesting change in my life. I decided in 2000 to go back to FDA. There was a lot of reasons for that, but when I interviewed, it was a group interview in Los Angeles, and there were several FDA people there. And a lady supervisor says to me something very interesting. She says, "Wow, Larry, we've never hired anybody as old as you." Now, I was 52 at the time, and I looked at her, and the other people all looked at her somewhat quizzically, and I said, I think I know what you mean. You've never had an opportunity to hire somebody with so much knowledge that I have, and that I can use that to help train people. And she goes, yeah, that's what. So I went home and told my wife, who will soon become my ex-wife by her choice, I've got the job, because age discrimination was clearly evident in the interview, and FDA doesn't want to go there, so they're going to offer me the job. And guess what they did?
If I understand you, and I just did the math in my head because I'm quick that way, did you just tell us that you're 72?
Gee, there's a chronological age and there's an emotional age. Emotionally, I'm about maybe 35,
14.
you know.
So
Yes, you're right. I just turned 72 on my last birthday, and my retirement will come the day I start pushing up daisies. I enjoy working, and being a consultant has been a really good experience for me. I've worked with a lot of companies, basically helping them understand FDA and what the requirements are. And also for the last 4 years or more, I've served as an expert witness in cases involving the FDA regulation of medical devices, and that's a very interesting experience. I actually enjoy it, and if you like working with lawyers, which some people do, some people don't, it's a challenging job, and it pays pretty well too. So anyway, that's me.
A lot of comments here that you look great for your age.
Well, thank you. I have good genes. Okay. Well, first of all, we're going to talk about the FDA people. The question is, who are the FDA people? And then I wanted to, at this point, talk about the main jobs that I saw. Now, you understand, when in the 70s, when I worked for FDA, it was my first job. I didn't know anything about management style and management responsibilities or motivations or anything. But in 18 years in the industry, I learned a lot about that. So when I went back in 2000, I was kind of a student of these people that I was rejoining and watched them very carefully. And that's kind of what this presentation is. So I was an FDA investigator, then I was an FDA compliance officer. I was never an FDA scientist, but they have a lot of scientists. And the last one I missed was FDA manager, because I was an FDA manager. And that was a real interesting experience. And I'll share some of that with you and tell you a little bit how those FDA managers operate. So let's look at those jobs now. And what do you have to be? Oh, sorry, one more slide before I go into the job qualifications. The people who don't know FDA, other than the individual dealings they have with them, mistakenly think that FDA, if they're successful in business, well, successful people in the FDA must think and act much like they do. And that's not illogical to think that, but it's not true. And it's because they're in a different environment, and they think differently, and they certainly act differently. And you've probably had some experiences, and we'll talk about that. So understanding that they're in a different world and they're different than you, intellectually, maybe not intellectually, but certainly emotionally and motivationally, they are different. So, all right, if you want to be an FDA investigator, and I would recommend it. It's a fun job. Having been a person in industry who had to deal with FDA, when they left, that's when my problems began. If they left the 483, I would, get together with the guys and come up with corrective action plans. But I went back as an FDA investigator, I didn't have to solve problems anymore. I could go in and find problems and write them up and walk out the door. And that was quite a nice experience after all that time. So all the FDA investigators have to have a bachelor's degree in life sciences or engineering. They have to have the ability to take notes, write a report. I would probably add to that now, operate a personal computer. They have to achieve level 1 certification. Yes, FDA does have a certification process for their investigators. I had to go through it back in 2000 when I started back as an investigator. My supervisor, who I had trained in the 70s, said, I got to go out with you there and make sure you know how to do an inspection. And I said, no problem, we'll do it. And I told him, I said, listen, we go in there, I'll have a 483 item within the first 30 minutes. And I did. Anyway, I passed. I got my certification. Now, interpersonal skills. Okay. That's not something that FDA investigators are trained in or even required. And that is sometimes the issues that you have to deal with, and we'll talk more about that. But the compliance officer, which is the next level up, these people have all the qualifications of an investigator or a chemist for that matter, if they've been in the lab. But they after they've done their time as an FDA investigator, they can become a supervisor or a compliance officer. The compliance officer is the person who takes the 483 and the EIR, the Establishment Inspection Report, and reviews it for significance. Yes, there is somebody who reviews that report, not just for volume, but for significance. And they have the ability to look at the observations, and they understand the regulations well, and they relate that, and if it merits it, then they have to write a legal recommendation of what they think the FDA needs to do, and that will then go back to the center for review by the compliance people back there. So it's a higher level job, it pays better, and it's got more responsibility. The FDA scientists, in the field, they're in the laboratories. Some of the major FDA offices have a laboratory associated with it. Most of the scientists in FDA are in headquarters though, and they're technical people. Most of them do reviews. Many have a PhD in science is the most common thing. Some of them also have PhDs in biomedical engineering. Certainly in the medical device center they do. And FDA does employ a considerable number of MDs and RNs to get their clinical expertise in it. So that's where those people, you will find them in the FDA headquarters. And when you go back there to meet, these are the people you're going to meet with. Okay, the FDA manager, my favorite topic. Okay, first thing is there is virtually no formal training in management for FDA managers when they become a supervisor, for example. So how do they learn how to be a supervisor? Well, they're mentored by other government managers who have no formal training, and they have a management style that has remained unchanged for over 30 years. And because I experienced it in the 70s and I experienced it in the 2000s, is they rule by authority. I'm your boss. Don't question me. Just do what I tell you to do. Okay. And those of you who are managers in the industry probably recognize that these qualities will probably not lead to success, and that's just the way it is. But the last one here is one that is actually just opposed to the needs of a business manager. You know, and I know from being in business that change is required. You have to, your whole company has to go through changes. They have to improve things. They have to improve the products. They have to make sure that they do things better and more efficiently. Okay, there's no force for that in the government. I love telling the story. When I went back in 2000, I was the director of import operations. The district director called a meeting because the document control person in the file room had resigned and files were backing up. They were still in paper files those days. Okay, and he goes, "We got a big problem here. We got to get rid of this backlog of this." And I said, "Well, I've got an idea." He said, "What?" I said, "Well, why don't we buy some scanners for the investigations branch, have them available to the different supervisors or investigators, whatever, and have them scan the documents that they collect, have them save their reports as PDF files, and then store them all on the server, and then when the compliance officers need it, they could just go on the server and access it that way, and eventually the file room will go away. We'll have electronic files." And the director looked at me and he kind of cocked his head. He says, "Are you saying we go to a paperless system? We're not ready for that." And I said, "Well, no, it's not paperless. You can still have paper. It's just moving forward. It will make it a lot easier to deal with." No. That's way too complicated. We can never do anything that. I'm going to take and reassign 5 people to work in that file room to get rid of that backlog. And when they get rid of it, we're going to get somebody else in there. Okay, so that's my story about how change is viewed in the government. And that was from how I remember that so well because I was like, I thought it was a good idea.
I can't remember who it was now, but I had a conversation, oh, I don't know, maybe it was 4 years ago. I remember it only so sketchily, and it was a guy who got commissioned somehow by FDA, maybe, to automate stuff, to be able to find things more easily. And I think that they had spent as much as $250,000 to $500,000 on it. And then ultimately, like when he was ready to, begin to integrate it, that there was a human being at FDA who was, I guess, the librarian or something like that, whose job would be imperiled if this actually happened, and that person blocked it somehow, and it never came to fruition.
Well, I understand that. I'm talking about 20 years ago. I'm confident that FDA has automated that.
I'm sure, but I would still think
20 years ago.
I've certainly heard, on webinars and the like, that people are still frustrated as heck trying to find things, and that it's way too cumbersome. It's certainly not the greatest user experience and user interface.
But it worked for so many years, and in the government, why, if it's not broken, why fix it? That's their approach to it. And that story you told, I've never heard it, but it's quite possible that things like that happen. I know when Trump went back there, that he was in for a baptism of fire because he was a businessman going into the government world, and boy was I right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into motivation. Okay, this is where Larry, the amateur psychologist, gets involved here. I've put FDA people into different buckets, and we'll talk about those buckets, and they're accurate. I mean, I don't know if anybody FDA people have ever seen this webinar, but I think they would agree with it. I don't know, so I'm sure there were certain things they would disagree with, but the fact is, all of them fall into one of these categories. So let's talk about the category, the dedicated public servant who works for significance, not for money. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, who is that? Well, almost all new FDA employees. In other words, they get their FDA job and they're excited about it. They're a public servant and they like the salary. It's not a bad salary. Okay, and then I say, who are people joining FDA after private industry? Okay, I know what that's like. But the point is that represents a very, very small number of FDA people. There are more people in headquarters who have industry experience, but not in the field. Okay, and then I say, of all employees over 5 years of services, I just estimate that less than 10% of the employees fall into this dedicated public service bucket, but many of the FDA managers do. They're true believers in FDA, and they think FDA is an important part of the government, protects the public, and that when they're a manager, that helps motivate them. Well, the question is, how do you deal with this kind of employee? If your investigator is, well, actually, it's a fairly easy one to deal with because these people tend to be upbeat and excited. You compliment FDA, tell them how you understand what FDA does. You can certainly tell them about your company and what you do, and then it'll be a fairly pleasant interaction if you're dealing with this kind of FDA employee. Okay. Now, this is another group of FDA employees. This tends to be the older employees or the employees with a lot of service time. And this is called the employee who will do the bare minimum to get by. Okay. They're not highly motivated. Their dedication is somewhat limited in the sense of that. So what do they like? Well, they want to get the assignment over with. I had these people working for me, and it was like they do assignments, but they just want to get it over. And the second bullet item is they're really not looking for problems. If an FDA investigator finds problems, they have to work harder. They've got to write up a 483. They've got to write up establish an inspection report. It's a lot of work. And these people, they really don't like writing those long reports if they don't have to. So they tend to not look for problems. How do you deal with this kind of employee? Consider yourself lucky. You'll recognize it. They'll kind of rush through things, and I encourage you not to delay them with a lot of conversation, kind of let them go. These are the kind of people that will do a 3-day inspection, not a 3-week inspection. And that, from a public health perspective, it's probably not the kind of employee you want out there, but from a person in the industry, this is a good person to deal with if you get that employee. Okay, this is another employee. This is the employee who's convinced they could not make it in the real world and is thrilled by their government salary.
Hold on a second. Rick Stockton wants to know, how do we get only those people you just described to visit your shop?
Well, the good news is you more likely will get one of those. You can't really request them.
Well,
we want that.
Say, we know J. Lawrence Stevens. Can we, get Bill?
No, it's the luck of the draw, and that's why so many people they have a few interactions with FDA people over their career, and they form opinions of FDA. When I was an employee with the FDA in the 70s, and I was doing this small business job, I had a guy ask me, he says, "Are you really a government employee?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I get my check every 2 weeks, and I'm a GS-13, yeah. And he says, "Why?" He says, but you want to help. You actually are helping.
Yeah, interpersonal skills.
Well, that was the job I had. I was a small business representative, and it was a fun job. But there was something about me that this guy at least said, "You don't act like a government employee." So, okay, here's another one.
Just a sec. I think we skipped. Let's see. They try to.
Oh, okay. I didn't go into the detail on this one. This is the one who thinks that this FDA job is the best job they could ever have. They don't want to get out there in the business world. And what do? Well, they try to act like they know what they're doing. They may not, but they certainly want to show that they know what they're doing. And they really want to find problems. I mean, that's what they see as their job. Their job is to go in and find problems. How do you deal with this kind of employee? Well, you manage them in the sense of maybe helping them understand things that they want. When they think they have found a problem, you can explain why it may not be a problem, or that it's such a minor problem that it really doesn't merit a lot of attention. In other words, they're negotiable in the sense of if you provide them evidence, hard evidence, that what they're thinking doesn't exist, they'll say, okay, well, I'll cross that off my list. So these are not bad people to deal with. They get worse as we go on, though, I assure you.
How many more brands of employees do we have?
I think there's 2 more.
Okay.
There's not that many buckets. I mean, this is,
Well, you said it gets worse as we go on. I was like, on and on, but okay. Hey, I'm entertained. Keep going.
The last one is the one that is the one that nobody wants. And I think it's the next slide, in fact. Okay. What motivates an FDA employee? Okay. This employee is in their first job. They really don't know what they want. They're somewhat intimidated because they're put into environments that are beyond their training, and but they do their best to learn. And so they may leave FDA and get a job that really pays well. Okay, what do? They ask a million questions. Sometimes they're intuitive. In other words, why do you do that? What's this for there? Why did you decide to do that? Why did you do that? Those aren't necessarily FDA questions that they have to ask for purposes of following their compliance program, but they ask them because they're curious, and they'll ask you about your job. You're the quality assurance director. What is your responsibility? Who was this point? Well, that was Larry in the 70s. Okay. I always envisioned myself as a successful businessman, and FDA was a stepping stone for me. But there are people like this. How do you do with this kind of employee? Well, talk with them. Answer their questions. The more you're answering their questions about how you do your job and why you do it, the less they're looking for problems. So these are good people to distract by telling them about what the business world's like and how you do your job. And again, this would not necessarily be a bad person to have because they may or may not be intent on finding problems. They can find them if they want, but they may not be intent, and you can distract them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, here's the one. Hopefully you've never met, but they're out there, I assure you. Fortunately, it's not a great percentage of the FDA employees this. Okay, this is the employee that I call the federal agent, who with a God complex and a need to protect Americans from evil corporate types faces the enemy who will always lie and cheat because they are profit motive. And you think, like, there are people like that in government? Oh yeah, they are the righteous. They are the ones who are the federal agents, and you as a business person are profit motive, and that's bad. And because your profits are your only goal, well, you'll lie and cheat then if you have to. And that's what they know. They're going in believing that you're going to lie to them. And how do you know if you got one of these persons? They'll make accusing statements. For example, you tell them something and says, I'm not sure I believe that. Are you sure you're telling me everything? I've had clients who had one of these people. He said he threatened that he was going to recommend a seizure of our products. And I told my client, I said, well, you got a blowhard investigator because they don't have that authority to do that. That's the compliance officer. They can gather evidence that they may think would support a legal action, but they can't do it. Now, another thing that you'll see in them, sometimes they can get very emotional and out of control, and they will raise their voice. They'll stomp, well, not stomp, but at least, you know, body motion wise show that they're concerned. How do you deal with this type of employee? I said, good luck. Okay. No, it really, you basically just have to deal with it and try and turn a cold shoulder to any kind of accusing statements. If a person threatens legal action, tell them that that's not necessary, that you're a firm that complies. Don't challenge their authority, which they don't have. And if they get emotional, out of control, recommend a timeout. Hey, maybe we can take a break. Maybe you get a cup of coffee, or you can go out to your car and smoke or do whatever. In other words, when in the 70s, I was doing an investigation. It was a food canner, and I was with an older FDA guy who was one of these guys. And he, during the inspection, he'd say to the manager or the quality director, I want to see your SOP on receiving. Okay, he gets that. And he says, okay, now I want to see your SOP on complaints. All right. And he says, and he gets, okay, now I want to ask, and the guy says to him, the guy's getting perturbed because the guy with me is just making these individual requests. And he says to him, could you write down all of the SOPs that you'd like to see, or if I give you a list, could you check the ones off so I don't have to keep running back and forth? And the guy tells him, no, I can't do that because I don't know. I just think of it on the moment that I get it, and then which ones I see, I can't list them out. And I could tell that the person that we're dealing with was his face was getting red, and he was, kind of grimacing. And I said to my buddy, I says, hey, let's take a break. Let's go outside. And he goes outside, and he walk out, and he starts laughing diabolical. He goes, ha, 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 I really got him, didn't I? Did you see that? I did that. Oh, I love it when I see a guy get like that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy's nuts. And anyway, I said, let's call it a day. I went back into the manager and I said, sir, I got to tell you, I'm not sure what was going on there, but I want to let you know FDA doesn't endorse that kind of attitude. And I said, I don't know if he'll be back or I'll be back, but the inspection's over for today. And he goes, oh, thank you so much. Well, I went back to my office and I went to my supervisor and I said, listen, I have never refused to do anything you've asked me to do, but don't send me out with so-and-so again. I do not want to work with that man. And he says, yeah, I know there. I know. That's the way he is. Don't worry. I won't ask you to do it. Okay, so that was my explanation as to, are these people really in FDA? And the answer is yes, they are.
Jerry, you want to add?
Absolutely, Larry. Hi, Larry. How are you?
I'm good.
Just want to comment that, over the 40 years, we've had great investigators, but your description of what you just said, we had one of those one time, and it was just incredible. Not going to say the name, but
Yeah.
that investigator was here for about 3 weeks, just literally pulling every document and so forth. But the upshot, I'm not going to give you all the details, but the upshot was on the day before the closeout meeting, they requested us to send some documents over, about 30 documents, so that they could add it to the report. We sent them at about 4:45. I got a phone call at 4:50, and the first words out of their mouth was, "What are you trying to pull?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And they said, "You know we close at 4:30. You're sending me these after the hour so that you try to mess me up." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking. I'm just sending what you requested. I'm not trying to pull it." And they went on and on. So then finally, the next day, up our walk, and I could see the walk from our window, I see the investigator and another person coming up. The other person came in and introduced themselves as a manager. And I said to myself, "Oh my God, I'm dead." The manager. But the funny thing is that the manager came and actually apologized for that investigator raising their voice and accusing me of something. So it obviously must have raised something at the office that they were at, because that person took the time to come and apologize.
Yeah, no, the FDA supervisors know who their rogues are. The thing is that they can't fire them. There's two ways you get fired with the government. One is you steal something, you sell your personal computer on eBay, or the other is that you physically attack someone, assault somebody. Those will get you fired. But other things they just deal with it. Well, thank you for that testimonial. It adds credibility to what I say. I'm sorry you had to have that experience.
Hey, Luke, I made you a panelist. You can share your screen. You wanted to say something?
Oh, I didn't want to interfere with Andre. In February we got an email that we were up for an audit in June, like right now, but it got postponed till I don't know when. I think it's still not set. What types are set up abroad of your FDA types? Can it be any of those types?
Well, yeah, no, I mean the people that come to visit you, you're more likely you're going to get a person who's easy to deal with. Those crazy people are few and far between. But that's a wonderful bridge into the next part of my presentation, is talking about dealing with FDA, because to achieve your desired outcome, and that's not always easy. So the first is, what type of inspector? I mean, you'll know within the first hour what makes this person tick. Because, and this, having gone through this webinar, you'll be able to put them into one of those buckets. And then the second is, what is the reason for the inspection? FDA does inspections for routine monitoring, surveillance inspections, or it may be a specific one, and the FDA investigator will tell you. If you say, they may not, or they might, but they may not. But if you ask them, why are you out here? What's the reason for that? And they'll tell you, well, it's a routine surveillance inspection, or somebody filed an MDR on your product, and we're here to follow up on this problem that we know exists with your product. And that's good to know, because you can start focusing then on the things that they're there for.
Okay. One of the nice things that happened was, in that email they asked for suggestions for hotels, because of course they have to sleep over. Should we put them in a very awful hotel, or should we put them in a very nice hotel?
Put them up in the Ritz-Carlton, and you pay the bill. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No, I'm middle of the road one. But the thing is, obviously, you're located outside the United States, I assume, right?
Yeah, Netherlands.
Yeah, okay. So that's why they notified you. The foreign inspections are always done. They have to be done by appointment in advance. And also, FDA uses their best people for foreign inspections, the ones who are most technically competent. And so your chances are the person you get will be a highly competent FDA person who knows what they're doing. And those people are easy to deal with. If you know If you know the
Yeah, that's
name of the
reassuring.
person, yep. If you know the name of the FDA person who's going to come out, you may not, but you can Google that name. You know, put their name in FDA, and you can get into the HHS directory and find out where they work. But also, there's some private companies who maintain files on FDA people, and they, if you're so inclined, you can find out what kind of inspections the person's done, what kind of regulatory actions they may have been involved in. So you can, prior to that person around, get a better feel for who they are and what they've done.
Michelle?
Okay.
So Larry, there's one type of employee that's was missing from your portfolio, and that's the newbie. So I had an auditor one time that I don't think 5 years into a job that you're a newbie, but apparently he didn't have the right qualifications or whatever to, while he was auditing independently, everything he wrote up, he had to call his boss about.
Right. Well, I think I did cover that.
Room to call his boss. And then, like, so the next day, we were able to provide evidence that he was about what he was asking for the day before. And he's like, well, I'm still going to have to write it up because I already called my boss. I'm like, we're back.
Well, you know, I think I did cover that in the new FDA people. But what you're talking about is very, very true. There are FDA people who don't have a lot of technical skills. Now, this is an unusual person, obviously very insecure if they're calling their boss and trying to get there. But they can take the position that if they saw something and you have fixed it, they're still going to write you up for it because it occurred and they saw it. They don't have to. They can throw it out because you corrected it. But if they were wrong, in other words, if they were just flat out wrong in what they concluded, and you can show them that, and they still persist on it, well then you basically are going to just have to deal with that. All right, compliance. The next dealing you may have with FDA is a compliance meeting. Okay, it's a key that you might have been called in by the compliance people. You may request a meeting, and the purpose of the meeting should be basically to try and clear up any misconceptions that you think might have been created by the investigator in their report. You may have an issue of having gotten a warning letter, and you want to meet with the compliance people to make sure that they're in agreement with your corrective action. So having an agenda is not a bad thing to do, and send it to whoever the compliance director, whoever you're going to, and if possible, compliment the FDA inspector. You don't win any battles by trashing an FDA inspector to their boss. If they're a bad actor, that boss already knows it, and you can say, well, Mr. or Miss So-and-so really worked hard. You can see that they were doing their best to do their FDA inspector job, and that was a good thing to see. And you may be, ignoring some more significant issues, but it's always a good thing to be complimentary if you can, because the inspector will probably be in the meeting. The supervisors, but they may or not. Okay, headquarters meetings. Now these are meetings that are usually related to plan submissions. The most common one now, I'm a device guy, and it's the pre-submission. And they call it their Q-sub program, but the pre-sub is the most common thing that's used to get FDA review started prior to the submission of the document. And the FDA uses a team. You send in your pre-sub request, and you give them a lot of information about what you're doing, and you ask several questions about it, and they will get their team together, and they'll divide it up, and they'll come up with a response. Now, when pre-sub programs were first going, you didn't really know what their answers were until you actually had the meeting, where it was either a teleconference or an in-person meeting. But about 2 years ago, FDA started a process of where about a week before the meeting, maybe a little bit longer, they'll send you a written document that tells you what it was. Now, when you go to the meeting, they've already determined what their responses are going to be. And if you don't know, then you're not going to change a lot of minds if they've already thought about it. The good news now is that this written response is one that will tell you a lot of valuable information about what FDA expects, and you may not have to have the in-person meeting. I like the in-person meeting because it introduces the reviewer to the company and makes real people out of them, and that can, for a new company, that can be a really big thing, because FDA knows all the big companies, but if you're a startup, they don't know you, and going into a meeting with them is a good thing. Now, the thing about, beware of time allotment. If they set 1 hour for the in-person meeting, wrap up before the end of the hour or on the hour. Don't go long. If you do go over, don't be surprised if somebody just gets up and walks out of the room. I had that happen. I was when I was in the industry, was with some of the people who I was meeting with. They wanted to talk more, and the FDA guy goes, "Well, the hour's up. I gotta go. I got a carpool I gotta make." And he got up and walked out of the meeting, right? And at that point I said, "Oh, we need to wrap it up. We need to wrap it up." But afterwards, the guy that's with me is, "How could you believe that? They could have just got up and walked out of the meeting. What kind of thing was that? Have you ever had that happen to you? We have meetings. You're supposed to resolve things." I say, hey, think about this. When you meet with people in the industry, they want to be at that meeting. There's something that you're discussing at that meeting that everybody has an interest in and wants to get it resolved. In an FDA meeting, most of those FDA people don't even want to be there. Those are extra things that they have to do as part of their job, but they don't see any real benefit to themselves from going to the meeting. You, on the other hand, are expecting the FDA to do something because you have certain needs. So I said the dynamics are different. And if you don't have any real need for the meeting and you have a carpool to get, you get up and you walk out of the room because you don't feel you're going to miss anything important. Well, my buddy wasn't too thrilled with that, but I think he accepted it. The key is, I put on here, when you have what you want, get out. In other words, if you've been discussing issues and you come to an agreement, for example, I was with a company who had done human studies in Europe and had a body of human data on it, and animal data, but not a full gamut of animal data that would be likely to include with a PMA. And the FDA said that, you need to do, this was an IDE meeting, you need to do more animals. Products like yours, we have a certain set expectation of animal studies that need to be done, and we want you to do all that. And I was aware of that, and I said to them, well, look, we've got human data, which gives you a lot of information about the product, and we've got some animal data. How about this? How about you approve the IDE with the understanding that we will generate more animal data to include in our PMA, so that when the PMA comes in, it's got a full gamut of animal studies as well as our results for our human trials. And the FDA goes, okay, that sounds acceptable. Well, the guy that was with me, who was the CEO of the company, wanted to make some statements about why would we do more animals when we're doing humans. And I just said, Jerry, we don't need more comments. The FDA's agreed with the approach. It's a good one for us, so let's get out. And so I hustled him out of the room. And there was a doctor with us. We always take a doctor. And he said, wow, that was a good outcome, right? That thing. I said, yeah, it's exactly what we wanted to get the human trials started. So when you have what you want, get out. These are things about generally dealing with FDA and what to say and what not to say, okay? Dealing with FDA field investigators, basic quality assurance is something that they need to learn. Some of them have learned it, but feel free to be a teacher with them if they need it, particularly like was mentioned that somebody at 5 years in was still calling their supervisor. That person needs help. Okay, fill in the time with information positive to your firm. In other words, try not to get into any in-depth conversations that aren't prompted by FDA questions. And if they're not asking questions, talk about, well, we've got this new program that we've done here, and we've done this system, and tell them good stuff. Try and give them information. What not to say? Okay, don't talk about problems. You think this doesn't happen? I was doing an inspection one time, and I'm in the warehouse, and I'm looking at products, and the guy who was actually the QA manager said, you know, that one product over there, we have huge problems with our supplier on that. They're consistently sending us products that don't meet spec, and we have to deal with it. And I said, oh, really? Well, let's look into that. Well, I think reason he did that, I think he was having trouble getting the controls necessary over the supplier, and he thought, well, if FDA writes it up on a 483, then I'll get all the resources I need. Well, that may be a strategy, but that's not a good one. And talking about problems is nothing that anybody should do. Second is, don't argue. Even if the FDA is wrong, don't say you're wrong. Arguments, you may win the argument and lose the battle. In other words, FDA's attitude is hugely important. So if you're in an FDA meeting and somebody says something that's scientifically invalid, you can just let it go if it's not significant, or you can say, there's probably some more information than I have that may help you understand more about this. And if the person says, tell me, if they say, no, that's okay, I know enough, then that's fine, but do not argue. The third is don't get overly technical. Don't assume that the person you're dealing with has a high technical competency. They might. You'll determine that as you talk more with them, and you know what they understand, so you can get as technical as you need to support your dealings with them. But don't overwhelm them with technical stuff. Negotiating with an FDA manager. Okay, this is fun. Okay. Say you're going in to meet on your corrective action plan to your warning letter, okay, and you know that you're going in there kind of in trouble. So you certainly get their perception of the issues. You can even do this in advance of the meeting. What is your concern? What can we talk about that you guys are concerned about? Assume you're not trusted, because that one of those people or more of them may be that person that I talked about who believes that all business people are dishonest. And be ready to give concrete examples. If there's procedures or reports that have been generated, provide those, have them with you, because that kind of evidence is important from an FDA perspective to document you've done what you've done. And finally, offer a solution that meets FDA needs but averts further FDA action. And I've had a couple of meetings on warning letters, and the solution that you look for there is FDA comfortable that our corrective actions are sufficient that we will have corrected the issues of the warning letter? And the answer is, yes, we do, but we encourage you to do better root cause analysis and document the effectiveness of your corrective actions better. And you say, okay, that's very good advice, thank you. Can we consider the warning letter issues closed, though, from this perspective of the warning? And the answer you will get, hopefully, is yes, you've satisfactorily completed what we wanted you to do as expressed in the warning letter. So you may have to give up something, but if that gets FDA to back off, it's okay. And that's kind of common sense. Okay, summary. We're getting near the end here. First of all, FDA people are not that different from industry people. They're not. I mean, people are people. They may have some different personalities, but those kind of people that I described, they're all in the companies. I know some of them don't keep their job very long, but they're there. This is a personality type. Okay. Other thing we talked about, FDA managers are very different, and I underlined successful industry managers. They have a different management technique, most of them. I did an experiment when I took over the import operations in 2003. I had been a business manager for 18 years, so I said, I'm going to run this like a business. I had 100 and some people working for me, 5 supervisors, 6 compliance officers. And the first thing I did was stand up in front of them and say, I got to tell you, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm not an import expert. I know that you guys are. I'm not. So I understand that. I am an expert on food and drug law. I've worked with it my entire life. And I want you to know that I want you all to be very successful, because if you're successful, I'm successful. And my job is to help make your job easier to do. Okay. Now, that would never come from an FDA manager, but I knew it would work. And sure enough, the reaction to that was excellent. And the organization started working differently, and it was very successful. And I was acknowledged by FDA over the success of the import operations. What they didn't know is that, well, I used modern management techniques, which work, and they did work. And thank you very much for the compliments. Okay, our last summary is knowledge of how FDA employees think can make successful interactions much more common. That's the key, is to try and engage what the person is, what they're motivated, how they're motivated, because you want to have successful interactions. And the goal should be to always have successful interactions with FDA, even though there may be some outcomes of the meeting that require you to do things. View them as from your perspective, as we interacted with FDA in a way that gave us the best possible outcome, and that'll do it. Okay, my commercial. My website is fdadeviceexpert.com, and that's my email, larry@fdadeviceexpert.com. I do the expert witness work, and one of the administrative people with one of the lawyers said to me, you know, Larry, I never forget your email address. Your email address is what you do. And I said, yeah, how about that? It works. So anyway, if you know people who could use FDA help, feel free to give them my name, and if we can work together. If not, I know other people like Michelle who can help them out. She's the EUA person in my mind. And other stuff, of course, too.
I have a question, Larry.
Sure.
I want you to comment on an old axiom that I've heard over the years, and actually heard from some other consultants, that you should always leave something minor for the FDA inspector to find, so that at least there's something for them to find. I want your comment on if you believe in that old axiom.
Well, actually, I don't. The reason is that they'll find stuff. If they want to find stuff, they'll find it. And but if you can go through an inspection and not get an FDA 483, that's obviously a good outcome. It doesn't mean that you have the world's highest quality system, highest sophisticated, most sophisticated quality system. It means that particular investigator didn't find anything that they wanted to write up, and that's a good thing. But don't let it lull you into a sense. But I definitely don't think like, oh my God, look, there's mouse droppings over there. How did those get there? I was an old food inspector, so that's it.
Gotcha.
Larry, I survived a very massive remediation with the FDA, with a company that I used to work for. They had a 6-year-old warning letter and import alert at one of their Mexico facilities. And they had made such a mess of the communications, the FDA was basically, just don't talk to us anymore. You tell us when you're ready for us to come back. And so I had to, and that was, 6 years before I got there. And this had been going on. I'm sure you can appreciate the port, San Diego was having to inspect every single truck, because of the import alert. And they were crossing 3 trucks a day. Right. So to get the FDA, the CDRH to go inspect the facility in Mexico again to get all this cleared up, I ended up having to get the Division of Operations involved, because it turned out, unbeknownst to me, those 2 FDA agencies don't naturally communicate. Can you speak any to the difference between the CDRH and the DIOP?
Yeah. Well, DIOP is a division of import operations. It's part of what's called ORA, which is the Office of Regulatory Affairs. I'm smiling only because the San Diego resident post was under my rule as the import director in Los Angeles. And
I'm sure if I wrote names, you would recognize them.
I loved import alerts because, well, it's a tool that FDA doesn't have over domestic companies. But the way an import alert works, if you've brought in violative product more than once and the FDA finds it, Imported is called also automatic detention. In other words, when it comes in, it's automatically held. And you have to provide evidence to FDA that it's compliant, which means either a private lab sample or your own laboratory, something to do it. So it's a major hassle. Now, what you run in with DIOP and CDRH, CDRH is part of the FDA headquarters organization, and DIOP is part of ORA, and the communications between those are not as good as they should be. Now, they're getting better because FDA reorganized a few years ago to more specialize the field and relate it more to centers and device people in the field. So, but that's always a challenge in the sense of the field people feel that the headquarters people look down on them, that they're the smart people and we're just the grunts out here working. Now, that's not always true, but that is kind of a general attitude. And so they tend to not want to take direction if they don't have to. But you got yourself a baptism of fire there.
And you know, at the same time, they had a full ISO recertification audit, and this is all, I found out all of this within 4 months of getting a promotion. I was such a child then. And they almost lost their CE mark because they thought a 510K was the same thing as a technical file. So, yeah,
wow.
it was. I slept under my desk a lot during that.
Most of your presentation has been about field agents, and I often hear questions on these types of events about, Nicholas, for example, wrote in, how long does it take to get my device approved? And I wrote back, even though I'm not the FDA device expert, that it depends on a lot of things, including what it is there a holiday coming up, are we in a pandemic, and other things. But I also have heard many times where people are afraid to talk to FDA. They don't want to, call them any more than they have to. And Rob, who I know is on the line, and would always say, they're there to help you, and go ahead and engage them. But you've shown us that you might call that guy that Rob's described, and you might call the federal agent who is wondering why you don't know the answer to that. I mean, is there some kind of general rule about? It sounds to me it's as individual as humans. Depends who picks up the phone.
Yeah, I can tell you the quickest way to get your device application approved, whether it's a 510K, IDE, or PMA, and that's use the pre-submission process. Is you actually start the FDA review early on, maybe even in the standpoint of designing your verification and validation testing, is have a pre-sub go in that asks FDA to look at your protocols and see if there's anything missing, and then you get your feedback and you do it. But what that effectively does is by the time you submit your 510K or your IDE or your PMA modules, FDA already knows your device. And you will also know the FDA people. You will know who your primary reviewer is when you start doing the pre-sub process, and that's the same reviewer that's going to have your 510K. And you're making their job a lot easier for them by using this pre-sub process. So when it comes in, they can actually make the decision within 90 days on a 510K, and they get brownie points for doing that. They actually get a reinstatement of the user fees each year based on their performance. So they want to keep those review times. So if you send in an IDE without a pre-sub, you're probably looking at 3 to 6 months to get that IDE approved. Even though it's a 30-day window, what happens is at the end of 30 days, they'll send back a major deficiency letter and tell you all the things that you should have had in your IDE, and you'll spend maybe 2 or 3 months putting that together. And they're essentially punishing you for not having used the pre-sub process. So that's the headquarters advice, is that identifying your primary reviewer, using the pre-submission process, and getting FDA review started and have FDA input so that when you submit, 90% of what they needed to review, they've already reviewed. And they can do a quick review then.
I added Rob because he's going to be our guest speaker on July 17, talking about virtual audits. And Rob, you're not only in the middle of one, I think, but you're writing a book about it.
Yeah, we've actually, when COVID-19 pandemic first started and everybody was put on quarantine, immediately all of our audits were canceled. Every single audit we had scheduled was canceled. Even people that had paid in advance, they said, no, we're canceled, we can't do it. Now everybody's rescheduling all those audits as remote audits. Every single one of our clients, even companies that said they didn't want to do remote audits, now they're loving the idea. So, I mean, not a big surprise to anybody, but this is what everybody's doing. The FDA has announced that they're going to not do foreign inspections, and instead they're going to review documentation where they feel it's needed and ask for documentation to show that companies have taking corrective actions on 483s and things like that, but they're not actually visiting the companies remotely or not visiting the foreign companies, and they're only doing the domestic inspections when they have to. And I think that makes good safety sense for the FDA, but I don't think it's going to be a long-term strategy for the FDA. I don't think they're going to switch over to remote audits. The notified bodies and certification bodies, most of them have come up with policies for what they can and can't do remotely. In general, they don't want to do production processes remotely. And the reason why is that they're very worried about fraud. The PIP scandal in Europe made them very gun shy to trusting companies, and they want to be on site at least for the production processes. So if you have a virtual company that's all software as a medical device, you could get away with a remote audit. And if your company is in a surveillance audit rather than recertification or initial certification, and they did a production process audit in the past, this time they could skip the production area and they could do 100% remote. And so those surveillance audits are also what they call partial audits. It's not a full quality system audit like recerts and initial certifications. But our company is doing all remote audits now. We're not doing any on-site audits, both supplier and internal. In between our conversation with Larry here, I was actually finalizing an audit agenda. So we're doing this real time. We've actually qualified a few new auditors. Matthew Walker, one of my employees, he's doing his third observed lead audit. So he'll be a qualified lead auditor. And we just did a training program from AMI. So I'll be teaching that in September. It's going to be a lead auditor course. So this is what we do, but AMI specifically requested we need a large section of this to be about remote auditing. So every single document in there has something about remote auditing and the differences. We're doing webinars all the time on remote auditing. ASQ came out with a guidance on remote auditing. But there's literally only one book out there right now on remote auditing. It's called E-Audits, and it's out of ASQ. And then ours will be the next one out there. But there's really not much out there on how to do it. A little table in the guidance document, and this new guidance from ASQ that's about 13 pages, and that's it. So there's definitely a need for people to specialize.
We're going to have to outmarket them. So nobody can even find the ASQ. It's all going to be Packard.
Well, the ASQ one we need.
I guarantee you his material will be better quality than, I hate to say it, than ASQ's, because their stuff was so antiquated. So it took this e-audit platform to even make them revisit their materials. Their materials still say email is a helpful tool to communicate when you need to request audits or request material. So.
Well, Rob, let me know if you want me to put my guy on designing your cover. Jose, you had something?
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the Q-subs. In your experience, is it beneficial to do it in person versus teleconference? I mean, obviously, it's kind of more of a pain, and you got to travel and everything like that. But then you get that personal interaction. What are your thoughts on in person versus teleconference?
Well, I mentioned that it's really good to meet the FDA people that are going to be reviewing your submission. So if you're in a U.S.-based company, that first meeting. Now, they encourage you to do several pre-subs. After the first meeting, teleconferences are fine, or sometimes the written response is enough that you can cancel a teleconference. But if you're remote, I had a client that was in Italy, we're working on an IDE pre-sub, and they communicated with the FDA via teleconference, and so did I. So the teleconference is something that FDA is amenable to. In other words, GoToMeeting or Zoom or any of that stuff, or just doing it on the phone. So, but getting to know your reviewer is huge in the sense of future dealings.
So as a follow-up, because I've also heard that it's not necessarily the same reviewer that you get a Q sub and the reviewer that ultimately sees your application. Is that true, or is it 50-50? What are your thoughts there?
True, depending on how much time is involved, because FDA people move around. Some people get promoted out, or they get new people in. If that happens to you, it's somewhat of a setback because you got to go on a re-education phase. But their goal is to have the reviewer take it through the entire process, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I'll show my screen to let you know what's coming up. Next week we get a double with Michelle and Nick, talking about two great tastes that taste great together. Reimbursement and regulatory can work together. And our very own Jose will talk about how to add cloud connectivity to medical devices the week after. I don't know how the hell to say this guy's name, so I'll leave you all to figure that out. And then Jan's going to talk about aging tests. Oh, and then it's me. And then Rob. And on the 24th, I actually do have someone. She's not a group member, but she came to me asking about something marketing about her product. And I looked at it and I thought, I don't know how well that's going to do. Besides, it's direct to consumer, which is not really my thing. And then she said, yeah, because I'm doing $1 million of it. And I was like, oh, well, teach us how you did that. So we're going to talk about how she's selling. I don't remember if it's a month or a year, but it was a lot. And I was like, really? So there we are. Final thoughts for the week? Oh, there are a number of people who aren't members that are joining us for the first time. And if you want to just write a note about how you found out about it, or if you've long been like a Larry groupie and this is just something you've been waiting for, that kind of thing.
I've been a Larry groupie for a very long time, and thank you, Larry.
That's what happens when you get old. People actually hear about you.
So
thanks.
Okay, well, 75 minutes is a good one too. So we'll leave it here, and
bye, everybody.
Stay safe, wash your hands, don't touch your face, and I'll see you online. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Larry. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Really good.
Bye.
Bye.